The Upsalagat people, the Crow people, say that before the sun comes up, when the sky starts to get light, that's the most sacred time of the day. Waking up in Yellowstone in the fall, the smell of the leaves, the fresh air coming down from the mountains, and then the sound of the elk bugle takes you back, puts you in a place that's very serene. Could have been any time for the past 12,000 years.
An elk bugle is very unique sound. When you hear an elk bugling and you're nearby, it is just a wonderful experience. A large bull can make the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
And so what you're hearing when you hear that is a male elk announcing its presence, usually to other males, and they're competing with each other to access females. This is called the elk rut.
And what the rut represents is the breeding season for elk. So what you have happening is male elk, the bull elk, will start advertising their fitness, their condition, their strength, their ability to be a good mate through bugling, through rubbing their antlers, tearing up the dirt, urinating in that ground, wallowing in mud to get their scent all around. And that is an advertisement to other bulls of their fitness and their strength as a competitor. Sometimes you'll see bulls approach each other in parallel walk. Sometimes there's direct chasing back and forth. Again, usually the larger bull chasing the smaller bull away. Sometimes there's actual physical contact where two bulls will come together, they'll bring their heads down, they'll tussle with their antlers locked, rattling back and forth. And then those bulls try to secure what is called the harem of cows, a group of cows that then they defend from other bull elk that might try to come in to breed with them. Those cow elk are also drawn to the bugle, and so cow elk congregate, and the bull elk come in to try to gather up cows to secure those breeding opportunities. It's a very exciting time in Yellowstone to witness. Elk are a member of the deer family that we call, in the scientific name, the Cervidae. And in North America, we have 5 deer species, and elk is among the largest. Elk are what we call ungulates. They're hoofed animals, like bison, pronghorn, and bighorn sheep. They're large brown animals with a white rump patch. And they do stand out when you see them out there because they're much larger than some of the other ungulates you would see in the park. Males have large antlers that are very impressive.
They can grow up to an inch a day at peak growth. And once they've finished growing to their full size, the blood vessels that supply the antler die and that skin that covers the antler is shed off. Then that leaves a dead, bony core. The antler then stays with the animal throughout the breeding season, and in the case of elk, throughout the winter usually. And then that drops off, usually around March. And after the antlers drop off, they start the process all over again. To think that this animal has put all this energy into this massive, sometimes as much as 35-pound growth, it's really a fascinating biological thing.
Elk are plant eaters primarily, so they feed on grasses, sedges, forbs, which are flowering plants that grow seasonally, and woody browse like aspen and cottonwood. They also share the characteristic of being a ruminant, meaning they have a 4-chambered stomach, and they have foregut fermentation, so they process a lot of vegetation. They have an important digestive system that allows them to chew a cud and swallow it, regurgitate it back up and chew it to really extract all those nutrients. The Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem with Yellowstone National Park at the heart of it is really important elk habitat. And we see that habitat being important at different times of the year. What is a key aspect to elk behavior for most elk herds is that they migrate from winter range to summer range. And the reason for that migration is for elk to survive, they need to find adequate forage. It is believed that somewhere around 7 identified elk herds will seasonally use Yellowstone, migrating into the heart of the park in the summer. Some herds are coming in from Cody to the east of the park. Some herds are coming up from the south near the Tetons. And of course, the northern elk herd, which summers all the way down around Yellowstone Lake. When fall comes and those first snowstorms start hitting, those elk will depart from those high elevation grasslands and start moving into lower winter ranges where there's less snow and they have greater access to food. Some of our elk herds, particularly those that use the southern part of the ecosystem in the summer, many of those elk are migrating south towards Grand Teton National Park, Jackson Hole, and the National Elk Refuge.
The National Elk Refuge provides critical winter habitat for the Jackson elk herd. That's why they return from their summer ranges each season. On average, about 7,500 elk winter on the National Elk Refuge. The Jackson elk herd is one of the most well-known and historically significant herds in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem because it's so easy to see the elk in the wintertime. When elk arrive, there's a gradient that they follow where they eat the most nutritious grasses and forage that's available first, and then proceed to the less nutritious and things that they like less. 97% of the elk in North America rely on native winter range to survive. The fact that elk are fed on the National Elk Refuge is a bit unusual. Elk are fed on average of about 2 months every year to get them through a period of critical nutritional need. Without supplemental feeding, the elk refuge couldn't support as many elk as we currently do. Elk are fed using mechanized equipment, and on average, we feed about 35 tons of alfalfa pellets to these animals every day once feeding begins in the wintertime. Our goal is to reduce the number of elk wintering on the refuge so we don't have to feed elk nearly as much as we currently do. In the spring, elk move off to their summer ranges in smaller groups than people observe them during the winter months. And during that time, usually around May, those elk that are pregnant will isolate themselves and give birth to calves.
Within the first couple hours of its life, it's up on its feet and mother starts cleaning it off. Quite wobbly, but within the first day, they can be up and running. What's really important to an elk calf survival early on is having access to its mother's milk. That's an incredibly nutrient-rich source of food that's important for that early development. Elk calves are spotted, they're small, they have this red, brownish colored coats and fuzzy little heads. They're very playful when you see them bouncing around their mothers. Really enjoyable to watch for anyone, whether you're a park visitor or a biologist. Elk provide a lot of food for scavengers and carnivores. Wolves, cougars, grizzly bears, black bears rely heavily on elk meat for their survival. So they really are a key part of our food web.
Grizzly bears and black bears have learned that elk young are vulnerable right after they are born. And so they're out there actively searching for a newborn elk calf. Once that elk calf is able to move with its mother, then the grizzly bear is out there actively looking for a herd that maybe he can ambush. So elk calves need to learn how to have the stamina to run for quite a ways as early in their life as possible. That way they're able to evade a predator like a grizzly bear.
Elk are a very important animal to my nation, the Upsalagan Nation. And I believe all the nations of this area hold them special. Elk are an important source of food. The hides that they provide are also a source of clothing. Those were the choicest hides that Native people preferred for shirts and pants because of the thickness and the malleability of it. And they had prized ivory teeth. In my nation, the Crow Nation, we especially value elk teeth dresses. And so we're known far and wide for elk tooth ivory dresses. One of the most important things about getting to know a place is understanding the history of it. And the history of the Yellowstone Park is inextricably linked to elk. The river that flows from that area is known for elk. All of the people of this region who have lived here for thousands of years call that river the Elk River. There's no doubt about the presence and the importance of elk to Native people in this region. And so the fact that it's now known as the Yellowstone River is misleading to many people because they don't understand the deep, rich tie that elk have to that area. That's their place more than any other animal. And the Native people understood that and treasured it because of that.
The area in and around Yellowstone National Park has always been a really, really important hunting and gathering area for Blackfeet people. Elk to the Blackfeet people were an important four-legged brother to us. They provided clothing and food for our people, and they lived on the land where we live. We existed in harmony with those animals, and that part of our history has been forgotten. And so people from around the world and other Americans go to Yellowstone, they need to hear that part of our story and know that Blackfeet were always part of that Yellowstone ecosystem.
Elk have a rich history here in Yellowstone National Park. Prior to the park being established, elk faced dire consequences with market hunting and poaching. Elk range shrunk, and the core protected area was Yellowstone National Park around the time of its development. So Yellowstone plays a key role in elk conservation in North America. In the early 1900s, in the absence of their main regulatory force, which would be native carnivores, elk herds increased in size. Early on, park managers felt it was now too many elk on the landscape, and so there was culling. In fact, Yellowstone elk, about 15,000 of them, were translocated throughout North America, 38 states, Canada, Argentina, Mexico, and Yellowstone elk became the key animal to establish elk herds throughout North America. So we can thank the success of today's elk conservation to Yellowstone National Park. There are two diseases that elk carry, and that would be brucellosis and chronic wasting disease. Roughly 20 to 25% of elk in the Greater Yellowstone test positive for brucellosis. And the big concern is the interaction between elk and domestic livestock, because those disease transmissions can have negative effects on the livestock industry.
Chronic wasting disease is a new disease that's threatening our four-legged brothers, elk, deer, moose. All those could be wiped out by chronic wasting disease, and there's really no cure for it.
It's a prion disease similar to mad cow disease, which many people are familiar with. And unlike viruses or bacteria, animals have no natural immunity to prion diseases. Supplemental feeding also elevates the disease risk for the elk that are fed. And prion diseases, not only can they be transmitted from one animal to another, but an elk could pick up chronic wasting disease from prions that have been deposited in the environment. And the big problem is those prions are very persistent for a very long time, years and possibly decades.
Elk, like all wildlife in our region, can be dangerous to people. So we recommend that park visitors stay at a distance of at least 25 yards, and I would recommend further at different times of the year, particularly in the early summer when cow elk have calves. They can be quite defensive and even aggressive. Similarly, during the rut in the fall, bull elk are very much focused on breeding behavior. So it's important to be able to enjoy an animal like the elk on our Yellowstone landscape, but to do so safely. Elk are an icon of the American West for many people, whether it be that impressive bull elk bugling on the landscape in the fall, or that large herd of cows with their calves moving across the summer landscapes. They really represent that wildness that people attribute to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem.
Elk are an essential aspect of this region. Their character, their presence are all things that make Yellowstone what it is.
It would be a travesty for our grandchildren to go into the woods and not hear the sound of a rutting bull elk and know that they're there living the same way that their ancestors lived. We want them to be able to thrive and prosper.